Hey guys, welcome back to Larry TCG. In today's video, I will be going over some of the news that we've received recently. So if you've been keeping up with some of the updates in the recent couple of days, you would have seen that Bandai has announced that on the 16th of March 2026 at 8 PM, they're going to be making an announcement regarding the limited and restricted list. So they're saying that this update will come into effect on the 1st of April, and they're going to be putting it on their website, doing a notification about the ban or restriction. So I thought it was very interesting because in the last couple of times they have done it as a live event at Worlds. I went to the Bandai Worlds last year in Japan, and they did it as a big sort of spectacle at the end of the tournament. So obviously when the winner was announced, they did a special showcase at the end where they showcased the new Roger leader, the new products coming out in the coming year, 2025. And then right at the end, they did a very cool Banlist reveal, which at that time that was Gecko Moria, Ice Sage, and Raigo, and Jinbei. So that was really, really cool to be there in person, obviously. But now they've opted to do sort of a different approach. So they're just going to update their website. They're just going to just put it there at that time. And they've made a little post about it, which is really cool. So I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation about this ban list specifically. The reason I wanted to do this one is because we're coming into a very significant change in the game. So we're seeing block rotation come in April this year, and we're seeing a whole bunch of the sets being released quite quickly in the lead up for Simultaneous release, which is around this time as well. So implications around the ban list will be very, very important across both the OCG and the TCG. And obviously with the rotation coming out soon, it's going to change how a lot of decks are going to function fundamentally, because they're going to lose a bunch of cards. And I thought with this, because this ban list is going to be quite interesting, because they're obviously going to be able to make decisions based on the fact that things are going to be rotated out, the fact that they know that products are going to release at a certain time. It'll be very interesting to see what they're trying to control leading up to this, and obviously with their set releases, they don't want things to be too outrageous in some respects, so they're going to make some decisions. But I just want to discuss some of the elements that go into this ban list specifically, and some of the things that we should consider. So firstly, as I mentioned previously, there is going to be block rotation coming up in April. So that means that there is a bunch of cards between set 1 and set 4 that will no longer be able to be used. In my previous video on the channel, I highlighted a bunch of cards that Bandai decided to update their block numbers for. So that means that they are not going to be subject to the block rotation that's coming up soon, which is really good for keeping a bunch of cards that they acknowledge are staples or are important for the game, but not too overpowered or have overstayed their welcome. So we don't know if in the future they're going to be, updating a bunch of more cards in that same fashion. But for now, we can assume that there is going to be quite a number of cards between set 1 and set 4, and every product between that is going to rotate out. Now, there are some cards that over time have been quite problematic from some of those earlier sets. So when I'm thinking about now in 2026 with some cards that, have been used in decks for many years now, the first card that comes to mind is Red Rock. So Red Rock came out in set 4, and set 4 was the set where we started to see a little bit more variety in terms of decks. So we saw Rebecca, we saw Vivi, we saw a number of different strategies emerge around this time. Obviously One Piece was quite new at that point, and they were experimenting with some new ideas. Red Rock was a pretty interesting card because for a cost of 6, you could bottom deck any card in the game, pretty much, as long as it couldn't be removed from play by an effect. So this is obviously a really good effect. However, at the start of the game, it obviously can be a little bit slow, and in some aspects, it's not always the best card to play. However, as time has moved on, we've noticed that some of the decks have become quite strong and very, very efficient with their cards and the effects that the cards have on them. For example, decks like Ace, or even the new blue and yellow Boa, They have very strong effects inbuilt with their engines, and their leader effect complements a very, very strong gameplay. So having the ability to utilize really strong engines that your deck already plays and have removal that is very ubiquitous, it creates this situation where it's a little bit skewed. So we've seen previously Bandai, they banned Raigo or Kingdom Come, which is also a removal, blanket removal. It says KO anything with any cost, and then you trash your life down to 1. Now obviously that card was very, very good in Enel. However, Enel specifically liked being at 1 life, and its mechanic was going to 1, being able to heal, and being able to use all of your strong top ends in junction with that. So Enel's gameplay of being able to starve you and then being able to remove all of your bodies, it created this very, very untenable situation. So Red Rock, up until that point, wasn't necessarily a card that achieved the same thing. However, we are seeing now, as the game is evolving and it is getting a lot stronger, that cards like that are becoming a lot more skewed. Obviously that card was printed a long time ago. Being a 6 cost, it meant that it was quite hefty to play and expensive, so it's not necessarily a card that was super, super broken back then. But as I said, now that the cards are getting a lot more stronger and efficient, then cards like that become way too strong, because the benefit of being able to play out a very strong unit and then being able to counteract your opponent's play of a strong unit by bottom decking it is quite strong, and it can shift the tide of a game quite considerably. So Red Rock is on the list for that reason. Some other cards that could be part of the conversation, cards like Eustace Kid from set 1. Now, Eustace Kid is an interesting one because it's very unique in what it does. There have been different decks that have used Eustace Kid across the lifespan of the game. Bonnie is definitely the best use case of that card. However, other decks have seen use of the card as well, such as Smoker from OP10. So Kid has definitely been spoken about in the past with respect to a ban. Now I don't think it's necessarily a card that may qualify for that. However, with the rotation coming up soon, we will likely see that card be shifted out of the game anyway. So I've stratified a bunch of my thoughts into a tier list. Now, I think there's obviously a lot to discuss and unpack with it, so I just want to reiterate that this is quite subjective, obviously, being a ban list prediction. Not really a prediction, but more a discussion. It is just something based on my personal experience, based on what my peers and my community has experienced and what I have spoken to them about. It's lived experiences at regionals and seeing results in my region, as well as seeing results overseas and seeing the progression of the game. So it doesn't necessarily reflect what should happen, but rather what I believe has been an ongoing trend or something that could warrant the discussion. So it's worth talking about anyway. So let's have a look and see what I've got here. So of course, firstly, big shout out to Kadi Kaizoku for this tier list maker. It is very useful. Please check out his link in my description and you can make your own deck lists and your own tier lists as well. Really, really helpful. So I'll go over some of the things that are on here. You're probably looking at this and going, oh, what's some of this? However, all of this has a little bit of explanation from my point of view. So let's start at the bottom. There is a number of things that we can discuss down the bottom first. So starting from the bottom, we've got the no tier. These are cards I believe shouldn't come back at the moment. And that is for one reason or another. They're just a little bit too strong or they're ill-placed at the moment in the format. So Reject obviously is, we don't need to talk about Reject. I think it's just outrageous, and Yellow is getting a whole lot of support at the moment, so I think that Reject should remain on the ban list. Raigo, similarly, it's in the same boat as Red Rock in the sense that it's blanket removal for any cost, which is pretty crazy these days, and I think that Yellow can definitely abuse this, so we don't want to give them the option to do that. Trafalgar Law Leader, this one is interesting. I think it's definitely a very strong deck. It's really hard to say whether or not it should come back at the moment, only because it does have its strengths. It's obviously at the time when it was banned, it was extremely strong, and we never really got to play it with Black Maria and Pudding, but we definitely saw the implications of that in the OCG. So I guess if we were to bring it back now, as the game has evolved since OP8, it It probably would not be one of the best decks, but it'd certainly be a very strong deck because a lot of red and purple options complement the leader effect quite well. And if you are able to use Black Maria to ramp your Dom back, it's pretty much free. So I don't know if he should remain banned. He's kind of in the middle of no and could come back, but I'm hesitant to pull the trigger on this one just because obviously the card pool can be quite generic for it and it can abuse some of the ramping cards in the game. So who knows, it might come back. This one is definitely for consideration. Won't spend too long on this tier. This is a tier where the cards on them will be rotated out, but I think still warrant a place on the ban list if they had a higher block number than 1. So Nami recently got banned, but she is a block 1. So if you bring her back off the list, you can't play her anyway because she's rotated out. And that's for all of these cards here. Now, Nami obviously is problematic as a leader. However, bringing these cards back means you're cleaning up the ban list a little bit, and it removes a little bit of redundancy there because you can't play them anyway, so there's no point in them being banned. They might have to put a little stipulation in, like what they did with Eruption and Ice Age and Moby Dick and Ennie's Lobby, where you can play them in the extended format, the new format. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but the one where you can play these cards in it. Ennie's Lobby, Moby Dick, Ice Age, Great Eruption, and Red Rock. Yep, Red Rock is obviously getting rotated out. It's not currently on the ban list, but I would say if it had a block number of 2, this could definitely be ban worthy. But since it's rotating out, you don't need to worry about it at all. So that's that tier. So this is a nice tier. It's the can come back tier. I think that these 2 cards in here, there is a case to bring them back. Jinbei definitely a lot more. So I'll go over Jinbei first. I think Jinbei honestly could have come back probably last list. He is a very strong card, obviously. However, we're going to see the Doflamingo leader be rotated out in April. So Doflamingo, the blue Doflamingo, definitely used this card the most effectively. Boa, the new blue-yellow Boa will not be playing this card at all, I would suggest. And blue Boa definitely is not broken with this card. It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to make it ban worthy for sure. So I think for what it's worth and seeing the Doffy leader being removed, I think we could see Jinbei come back. As for Moria, I'm a little bit on the fence. I will admit this is my first case of bias in that I like playing Moria because I think it's a cool card. However, I do acknowledge that it is very strong. However, I want to make 2 points regarding the return argument. So I think that black decks as a whole have seen a big identity shift in the last couple of sets even. Ever since we've seen Emu come out and we've seen the ban of Ice Age and Gecko, we've seen these decks sort of fall off in popularity, and Bandai haven't been releasing a whole lot of removal support. So it's very, very evident that Bandai wants to change the identity of black, and they want to not make it possible for them to have all this crazy removal, which is completely fair because at the time it was very hard to deal with. However, I think now, with the current status of the game and black decks being, I guess, having to use cards that are so old now, it creates this bit of a gap where black decks are now not even really viable anymore, apart from Emu, as I say. There are a lot of cards these days that have effects that prevent themselves from being removed, or there are big detriments to removing your opponent's board. For example, Boa, if you KO one of their Kuja Pirate or Amazon Lily, then they have to take a life. So there is a detriment to doing that. Some cards have built-in protection effects, so you can't even remove them to begin with. So it makes it a lot harder for those decks to compete normally into decks like that because they can't just KO your opponent's entire board for free and run away with everything. So a card like this is obviously quite strong. However, I think in modern One Piece, I think this one could come back just because it may not be as strong as it was back in the day. In the similar vein to Jinbei, I think, think of its use cases now. Like, I guess with OP15 coming up, would Brook want to play this card? I'm not sure. You could put it in the Black Yellow Moria deck, but honestly it prefers to play its own 8 cost 10k because it can heal. And when we're looking at other decks at the moment, there's not a whole lot of black color representation in the game or in the meta at the moment, so I don't necessarily think that this card will move the needle too much. So moving on to the restrict worthy tier. This tier is interesting because I want to say that these cards here may potentially be, or some of them may potentially be substituted for other things. So the reason I put 5 Elders here is because when we look at an emu list, it's actually really difficult to, I guess, figure out what the best kind of hit would be for it. Obviously the deck is very strong and it has a lot of synergy with all of the pieces that it plays, and it plays a very, very Celestial Dragon, 5 Elders focused package. So, you know, if you were to say put all of the Elders to 1, or put 1 Elder to 1, or put, you know, one of the Never Existed event to 1, or ban Throne, for example, it would be very strange. Like, you'd have to consider the implications of every decision regarding a change to the emu deck. So my thought process with this one is that if we put the Elders to 1, you can still do the effect of the Elders and obviously recycle it with, you know, effects in your deck like Shirahoshi. However, you're not chaining them back to back to back to back to back. It creates this situation where you have to be smart about what you're sacking off with your leader effect, when you're choosing to block, what cards you're choosing to, you know, trash for your effects. You're going to have turns where if you don't see this card, or if you've already played your card, you're going to have to play without it. So it creates an element of gameplay that often Emu doesn't have to worry about because of the strength of the deck of being able to, you know, search for so many copies of this card. You've pretty much secured that you're going to be playing this card 2 to 3 or 4 times in a game, and that's often enough to win the game. So I'm not sure if this is the correct one that I would limit. However, it's definitely one worth discussing. The other one is maybe Throne. However, I think Throne is it's a little bit more controversial just because if you ban that, for example, obviously they only play 1 because they play it at the start of the game, but if you ban it, it creates this situation where Emu might be a bit too weak, because obviously Throne is a very good card. However, the costs and the effects and stuff of the 5 Elders are good because you're able to play them out early and summon them more efficiently off the throne. So I think if you're having to play Mary Joies and, you know, you're not seeing a whole lot of benefit from that, it creates a situation where you're not able to set up a board, or you're not able to deal with a lot of faster decks as well as you previously would have. So I don't think Throne is the correct choice. Anyway, Emu is a very tough deck to think about in terms of what to hit, but I definitely think there should be something on the list anyway. Lord Beppo, so this one is, I guess, just to stymie the Mihawk deck a little bit. It's only because I think in certain aspects this card can be quite overpowered with what Mihawk likes to do. So if you think about Mihawk, obviously it restands a lot of Don with its leader effect. It's able to use a lot of really strong green events, and it's able to have a lot of defensive power with cards like Shanks, reducing your opponent's board, the 9-cost Mihawk, which enables you to get a free 2000 counter by pitching any card from your hand when your opponent attacks. So the issue is that if you're chaining this card, which A, is stunning your opponent's board and keeping it frozen, and B, it's making your leader 7000 base, which is quite strong if you think about, obviously your deck plays a lot of 4K events, and then it has a lot of defense built into the deck itself. Having the ability to play this back to back is quite problematic for those decks, especially if you are already in a position where you've played the Shanks on your 7, maybe another Shanks, maybe a Mihawk on the 9, whatever you've got at the time. But if you're able to chain this card, it means that you're a 7k base for multiple turns in a row, and you're getting the benefits of being able to use less cards for counter. Your units are so big that if you're freezing one of your opponent's big threats with Lord Beppo and you've got Shanks reducing the rest of the board, it makes it very, very hard for your opponent to interact with you. I don't necessarily think that Lord Beppo is super crazy in a vacuum. However, I think with the leader effect and the game plan of Mihawk, I think it's very, very strong. So if I had to choose a card from the Mihawk deck, it would be Law and Beppo. The thing is with Bandai, there's no precedent of them putting a card to 2 or 3, but One may be a little bit too harsh for Lore Beppo, but you could, there is an argument to put it to maybe 2 or something, just because you're not going to see it as much when you're searching, and it's going to reduce the amount of times your opponent's going to play it multiple times in a row. The next cards that I'll mention are 2 events, so DMG and Gum Gum Giant. So DMG is, again, very strong for the Mihawk deck and a lot of green decks in general. It's become a very generic event where pretty much every green deck plays it because it's a +3 to your leader at minimum, and later in the game it enables you to rest dons and blockers and go for game, which is pretty strong, especially with some decks that are able to get the Dom back with their, say, leader effect or with a character effect. You're pretty much not paying a cost for this. For example, for the Mihawk deck, it plays 1 Don. It uses 1 Don and it can rest 2 things, which is quite insane. And previously, because I mentioned that they are playing Lore Beppos back to back, which is an 11k swing, and they're also playing the 7 cost 9k Shanks and the 9 cost 10k Mihawk, which are massive swings. So if you're having to block her up or leave some Don up to protect yourself and then they rest it for the effectively 1 Don, you are out of luck. I think you just lose that game. But I thought it would be an interesting conversation to have. This very well might not happen, and if it doesn't, it's fine. I just think that this card's quite strong for what it is, and it's definitely in a league of its own with respect to 1 cost events, except for Gum Gum Giant. Now, Gum Gum Giant is definitely a card that has been discussed at length in the past regarding ban lists, and I think it's still worth a discussion. I don't necessarily think this card should be banned. However, I think that as the format progresses and we see stronger strategies that may have countered, say, Blue Purple Luffy or Sanji or some of the Luffy decks come out, we're going to see a rise in those decks naturally. If the enemies are gone, they're going to come back out of the woodwork. So previously we had the pair ban with Lin Lin and Katakuri for UP, but now with EBO 3 coming out, we're seeing Sanji actually pop up and become quite popular. Now, this is just speculation on my behalf, but I think that a card like this is obviously problematic in environments where those decks are very strong, because every deck is playing it. So it may be worth potentially putting this card to 1. Who knows? They might leave it at 4. They left it at 4 last time, so it definitely could be something that they choose to do. Now, let's discuss the pair ban that I've got here. So I believe that Ace by itself is a very strong deck, obviously. However, I don't think it's necessarily super broken to the point where I would think about banning the leader, or I would think about banning anything inherently in the deck. However, I think a smart option would be to pair ban the 8 cost Whitebeard event and the Ace leader from OP13. And the reason for that is, I think that this card is outrageous in Ace. The advantage that the deck gets from playing this card is very, very strong. I think that you're effectively giving blue a ramp card. You're effectively allowing it to play a 10 cost on 8 Don, or 9 Don, which is outrageous. And the 10 cost it's obviously playing is one of the best 10 costs in the game. So it creates a situation where they're able to play the 10 cost so early that it's really hard to keep up. And obviously that 10 cost disperses 4 Don and it filters their hand as well. So it's very, very good. So I think that it is smart to pair ban these 2. I don't think taking Newgate away from Ace is the smart thing to do. I think Newgate is fine. However, I think being able to play him on 8 is not fine. So yeah, that's the pair ban for Ace. Now the ban-worthy section. I think obviously this will be more controversial than the below tiers. However, I think we should rip the band-aid off with some of these cards. So let's start with Pudding. Pudding is... Pudding is Pudding. If you've played this game for any length of time, you'll understand that this card is very scary. You sit across from a blue player, it completely warps how one plays the game. I certainly understand that there are some aspects of the game where this card is needed in some specific aspects. For example, if you're versing a Nell from OP5 and they're taking all of their life and they've got a 400 card hand, and there should be a way to punish that. Obviously, it's quite obnoxious when they're going to 1 life, healing and having infinite lives. I get it. Having a card like this means that it kind of stops them from being able to turtle and being able to have a massive hand size. Being able to putting, say, Bonnie is also very good, because Bonnie also likes to take a lot of its life and then sit behind Eustace Kid, which I mentioned before is getting rotated out. That was obviously problematic in the past, and a good punish for that was to putting the hand. However, in some cases, putting can just be downright unfair. Now, in most cases, people are playing around this card inherently. If you're versing blue, you're not taking all your life, because if you get puddinged on a 10 card hand, then it could just be GG there. However, there are a lot of instances where you've, say, sculpted your hand across the game, and then you get puddinged on your opponent's, say, 7 or 8 on turn, and it just randomizes your entire hand, and it can just screw you from that point. And I think in those instances, it can be pretty unfair, just because it creates the situation where you get RNG'd out of a game that you have done all the right things in, and I think it can create some pretty unfortunate situations for sure. There are definitely some instances too where if you're not drawing enough counter, you're having to take your life, not because you want to, but because you're not able to guard your swings, and then they're putting your hand away. It's like, you can't control that a lot of the time. Obviously, you can opt to deck build a little bit better and have a bit more counter in your deck, but we've all had a game where we sat down, there's 1-2k counter in your hand, and then, or 1-1k counter or whatever, and then they swing a bunch of 5s and 6s, and you have to take a 5, you have to take a 6, and then they're putting you, and your 7 or 8 card hand goes back in your deck, you've got 2 life, and you're like, damn, like, this is pretty grim. So I think pudding is definitely a card that should go on the ban list, just because we're not going to be seeing it rotated for the next year, and I think it's going to create a lot of problems between now and then. It's also played in some of the best decks at the moment, being Ace and Boa, so I think it is a card that can definitely go. Now, the next card I will discuss is actually Perfume Femur. I'll discuss Tsunami after, just because this one's probably the most controversial. Perfume Femur is just extremely strong. I think we had a lot of experiences with Perfume Femur back when Doffy was the best deck, or one of the best decks. It's a very, very strong card. You get aggroed down to 0, and they do a massive swing into your life, unblockable, and oftentimes you can't guard it. So Femur, for that reason, is quite good. Now, the reason I've put it here on ban worthy, because they didn't ban it before when Doffy was one of the best decks, they banned Jinbei instead, it's because of Boa. Now, obviously, Boa is one of the best decks at the moment, and she is blue and yellow, so she gets the benefit of being able to trash your opponent's life / make them take their own life by using their leader effect, or using cards like 9-cost Boa, and now this Tsunami. So it creates a situation where your opponent has to be very, very careful of their resources in their life, because at any point, if they go to 0, then the threat of being femured for 20,000 is on the table. Now, Boa inherently forces a lot of counter and forces a lot of life, so I think, in say a deck like Blue Boa from OP7, it's a bit different because you're a control deck, you're a lot slower, the games go for a bit longer. However, your opponent is not incentivized to attack you when you are blue-yellow Boa, because you get triggers that summon bodies, and then your opponent's also not incentivized to attack the bodies because they have to take a life, and if they go to 0, then you can femur them. So I think for that reason, Perfume Femur should be on the ban list, because it would remove that mini game of, if I go to 0, do they have femur? They can sometimes just search the card as well, and they have it for the whole game, and you can't do anything about it, and then you know that you're going to get femured, and the game plan just shifts to aggroing you to 0 and femuring you, which it does not feel good. And obviously, combined with cards like Pudding as well, you're able to pudding your opponent's hand and randomize it to say if you've left some done up for events, or your opponent has quite a large hand size, you can putting them down to a 5 card hand, and if you femur the 9-cost Boa, you can swing for 16k, which, if their hand is all 2ks, they can't guard out of it, even if they're a 6k leader. They have to randomly draw into their events again, which is an awful situation to be in if you've been puddinged, or if you just straight up don't play those kinds of events. So for that reason, I think, yeah, Femur should definitely deserve a place in the ban list. As for Nami, now this is the most controversial one, as I said. I think Nami will be quite problematic moving forward. And the reason I'm saying this is because when it came out, it was immediately put into every single yellow deck that existed. It's obviously a very generically good card. It makes your opponent take a life, it gives a Don. You can't really KO it because it can replace itself. It is very generic and it's got a 1k counter. It's probably one of the most broken cards I've seen in a very long time, to be honest. Now that doesn't factor into why I put it on here. I'm thinking of putting this on here as more of a check for the future. So as we're coming up to block rotation and simultaneous release, we're seeing a bunch of products drop quite quickly. Now recently we've seen EBO4 drop in Japan, and we've seen a bunch of tournaments being played with those cards. Now a deck that's seen a lot of popularity recently has been the blue-yellow Nami deck, because it's gotten the girl promo, which, you know, we just gotten the English, but they've had for a long time. They've gotten the 7-cost Robin from EBO2, which heals 2 life. They get this Nami. You have the Borsellino. I think that card as well. I think those 2 cards have created this situation where yellow decks are able to heal quite consistently and also trash your opponent's life quite consistently. Now obviously Nami doesn't trash life, but it forces the life into their hand, which is effectively trashing a life because they're going down on a life and they're going to have to guard a leader swing most likely because you're attaching a Don and swinging for 6. So this card is quite strong, and I think that the climate of the game may change if this card is legal and a bunch of yellow decks decide to just play generically good yellow cards that say trash your opponent's life or heal. Now, we've been through many iterations of yellow decks just being a slot pile and trashing your opponent's life. We've seen cards released like Robin, 6 cost, we've seen 8 cost Kid, which can trash life. So it's not a new thing that yellow decks are able to heal and trash life and be super degenerate with some of these cards. However, I think that at a certain point it hits a critical mass just because we have so many generically good yellow cards at the moment, and Nami adds to that pool of cards, and so does that Borsellino. Being able to heal on play and be a blocker, being able to take your opponent's life on play and give a Don and replace itself, I think that these attributes warrant it being on the ban list, just because I can see a future where the format devolves to yellow decks just bullying all of these other decks that are coming out because they're able to trash their life or heal and, you know, take advantage of so many triggers that are in the game. You know, your 6 life Luffy deck can use the Robin, which is able to heal back to, you know, 2 more life on top of your 6 life. Yellow decks now have more options to remove your opponent's life or trash it, so I think it may be quite problematic in the future if this card remains. However, I will say it is a very new product. Obviously, the OCG have had it for a while, so they've seen the impact of the card. We don't even have it. At time of recording, this set's not even out. It comes out in like a week. So I think that Bandai may choose to keep it just because it is a new product and they want it to sell. But I think it's pretty problematic in terms of card design. So that's why I place it in the ban-worthy section. So let me know what you guys think about some of the selections that I've made here. I did have to think about this quite thoroughly when making this video because I know that Bandai is quite reluctant in making big, heavy-handed, sweeping decisions with respect to a ban list. However, I know that this is going to be quite considerable moving into simultaneous release and the block rotation. So this will be quite a impactful ban list. So guys, thank you very much for watching the video. If you did enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.